In this video I'm talking about Asperger Syndrome and 5 things that you probably didn't know about it. Super pumped, coming up. Hey guys, welcome back to the Aspie world. My name is Dan. I have Asperger Syndrome, ADHD, OCD and dyslexia. I make weekly videos on this type of content, so if you're new around here and want to learn more, remember to hit that subscribe button by hitting the notification bell and setting it to see all. Also, if you're watching over on Facebook, make sure to give this page a like and a follow so you don't miss out on the daily videos I put up there. Okay guys, this is super interesting. I've just wanted to do this video for a while, just talking about some of the interesting things that you probably didn't know about Asperger Syndrome, and yeah, let's get started right now. Hey guys, what's going on? God, my hair is super long these days, wearing my own merch. Check it out, the Aspie world, at the Aspie world. And also guys, if you ain't following me on Instagram or Twitter, you can do at the Aspie world. Right, at the beginning of every single video, I like to ask you guys a question before answering some questions that you've asked me. So the question I've got for you guys today is, do you identify as Asperger Syndrome or do you identify as ASD now? Let me know in the comments below, I'd love to know. Okay, so first of all, let's read out comments from Instagram. So at the beginning of every video, I try to answer questions that you guys have asked me over on my Instagram. So if you want me to read out one of your questions, go and hit the follow button on Instagram. Link is in the description below, so you can follow me on Instagram and know when I'm asking you to ask me questions so I can feature you in a video just like this. Okay, so the first question here is from Black_Cat_Ellie, and they said, do autistic traits get more obvious to others when you are stressed? I would say yeah. I would say that when you're stressed or you're like in a heightened situation, then your autism kind of traits are going to be more intensified, I guess, if that's going to make sense, because you're going to be under more pressure, you're going to be under more stress. I would say so anyway. Okay, so Manfred the Frog said, how important do you think it is for someone, especially a young adult girl, to get an ASD diagnosis? Well, I would think that it's super important, because people ask me this all the time. They say, is it important to get a diagnosis of autism? You know, is it worth it? And I'd say yeah, every single time, for the simple reason that if you have a diagnosis of autism, you're going to be able to get access to more help than if you didn't, if that makes sense. Okay, so the last question here is from Kaylee.Louise.568847, and they said, will you do another conspiracy theory video again? Absolutely, 100%. I did a conspiracy theory video on my channel about a month ago, because conspiracy theories are kind of my obsessions, and anybody who knows anyone who's on the spectrum have like obsessions, and my obsessional interest is conspiracy theories. Now I did one last month, and it was amazing, and you guys loved it. If you want to see that video, I'll try and leave it in a card above here so you can watch it at the end of this video, so you can just line it up to see it next. And yes, I'm going to be doing more videos on conspiracy theories and all cool stuff, so that is all coming up. Okay, let's go on with the video. Okay, cool. So I've kind of made a map of like 5 things that are like factual kind of information, bits and pieces about Asperger Syndrome that I wanted to share with you guys, because we talk a lot about Asperger Syndrome on this channel, and then there's a bunch of stuff that goes with it that like probably you didn't know, and I'd love to share that with you and open up this discussion, because at any time you guys can leave a comment in the comment section below, and then we'll have that discussion and open it up, which is super, super awesome. Also, apologies for not having a video last Tuesday where I was supposed to have a live stream. My apologies. Live streams every Tuesday. Don't worry, they're coming. Next one's gonna be a Q&A, so watch out for that. Okay, cool. I'm loving this like t-shirt, you know, looking like my own merch. This is cool. So if you are interested in any merch, merch links are in the description below, and I'll leave them on the screen here somewhere, so you guys can check out my merch if you want to buy it. Okay, cool. So on with this video. Okay, so number 1, I'm going to talk about Asperger Syndrome isn't really a term that is used to diagnose anybody anymore. So as of 2013, it was replaced by the Autism Spectrum Disorder, which is from the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic criteria from the American Psychiatric Association, have a diagnostic criteria called the DSM-5. And in this 5th edition, they removed the term Asperger Syndrome and actually replaced it with ASD, which is an Autism Spectrum Disorder. And they did this in an attempt to help people who were being diagnosed with Asperger Syndrome but being denied the support and help for someone with an autism spectrum condition. So where they were trying to see autism differently to Asperger Syndrome, which this isn't the case, because autism is Asperger's and Asperger's is autism, they were having issues where people legally and kind of socially were not having access to the right support, so they changed that over. Now a lot of people still think that Asperger Syndrome is like something that they're diagnosed, and I haven't known really of anybody actually having a diagnosis of Asperger Syndrome since 2013. I was diagnosed with Asperger Syndrome in 2013. Of course now it's Autism Spectrum Disorder, but back then it was Asperger Syndrome. Now if you can share some information with me on if people are still using Asperger's as a diagnosis, then I'd love to hear that. Okay guys, so number 2. So Asperger's is named after Hans Asperger. And Hans Asperger was an Austrian physician, or like a doctor, and basically he conducted some of the first research bits and pieces on the subject of like the autism spectrum disorders that he kind of classified as Asperger Syndrome, which is the typical traits that you associate with Asperger's. But if you're not familiar with the traits of Asperger Syndrome, I'll try and leave it in a card above here so you can actually check out a video that I did on some of the most common kind of traits of Asperger Syndrome. And Asperger's is pronounced Asperger's because it's the name of Hans Asperger, it's his last name. So he was the guy that kind of like actually did the research in it in like 1940s and whatever. So it's named after him, but we'll be doing a little bit more on the nomenclature and how Asperger's became popularized in a few minutes, a couple of points down the line. Okay, so this next one, number 3, is very interesting. It's to do with the fact that when Asperger syndrome was first used as a diagnostic, they started diagnosing males, and then they said that there currently is a lot more males diagnosed with Asperger syndrome than there are females, which isn't the case showing that females don't have Asperger syndrome, but years and years ago they thought that's what it was. So when Hans Asperger first did his research, he actually said that females can't have Asperger syndrome, it's only a male genome thing, which is completely untrue. As we now know, they rectified that information, and now females and males can both be diagnosed with Asperger syndrome, or as it's now called, autism spectrum disorder. But back then they didn't diagnose as many females, so now you have more of a population of males with an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis than females, because of that lack of, or should I say the ignorance of the fact that they didn't realize that females could also have an autism spectrum condition. This is fascinating because I feel like females also get like the brunt end of the autism diagnosis, and they're always left out, and they're always last to get the diagnosis, and it may take a longer time because they're kind of treated a little bit different as well. And I did a great video on that with a girl called Charles Davis. Again, I'll try and leave this at the end of the video so you can check that video out about traits of autism in females, which is a great video, and definitely check it out and let me know what you think. Okay, so number 4. Asperger syndrome wasn't a term that people used until the late 80s, or until the 80s really, where a doctor called Lorna Wing popularized the term in her publication in 1981 called Asperger Syndrome, a Clinical Account, which is basically a series of publications where she did case studies on kids who were displaying similar social and communicative issues as Hans Asperger was dealing with back in the 40s. So she used this and called it Asperger Syndrome in 1981, and that's when it kind of became popularized English language wise as Asperger Syndrome, because before that it was more like European research, and I don't really know if they called it Asperger Syndrome. They must have had a different term for it or whatever. Of course, Hans Asperger wasn't the only person doing research on what we now know as autism back then either. Okay, so number 5 is Asperger Syndrome wasn't a standard clinical diagnosis until 1992, which is crazy. Think about this. When I was younger and I was going through high school and I was going through primary school, the psychs and the my one-to-ones didn't really know what was going on, and they had no kind of background in autism. They didn't have any background in psychology or clinical psychology or anything like that. They didn't know what Asperger syndrome was. They didn't really know about autism, because you got to think, look, Asperger syndrome wasn't really diagnosed in people until 1992, and you're thinking, if it was a term that was used in 1992 to describe people, I mean, all those people beforehand, they must have struggled really bad not being able to get the diagnosis. Now, this fascinates me because it was in the mid-90s, between like 92 and 95, when my parents were really trying to take me to see different types of doctors and things like that. And when I was in this process, they didn't even know what was going on. They didn't understand my type. They kind of said like I was agoraphobic, or like I was overly shy, or I have like a bit of delayed learning because of dyslexia or short-term memory loss, and all these kind of like basically a big list of comorbid conditions, and they didn't even know what was going on. So this fascinates me to see how the timeline of where this actually slotted in came into play. And actually, in fact, it wasn't until 1994 that it was added to the 4th edition of the American Psychiatric Association's diagnostic, the DSM I was talking about earlier. So the DSM refers to the diagnostic kind of papers, and there's different versions out, and in edition 4, which is the one before the 2013 edition, the edition 4 actually in 1994 added the term Asperger Syndrome as a diagnostic criteria. And that's fascinating. So you got to think, 1992 was when they first started diagnosing people with Asperger Syndrome, but it wasn't until 1994 that the official kind of like the official DSM document actually hosted Asperger Syndrome on there as a diagnostic criteria, and you could follow like a pattern through that. I find that absolutely phenomenal because, you know, often people say like, oh, how old were you when you were diagnosed with Asperger Syndrome? And I said, well, I was 26 when I was diagnosed with Asperger Syndrome, but that was in 2013, or just before the DSM kind of got renewed. And you know, people say, oh, how did you wait that long? And I say, well, you got to think about this. I was, you know, a young boy attending primary school in the early 90s, and I live here in Wales in the United Kingdom, which is like at the back end of nowhere, and like there was no kind of psychologist who knew anything about autism or any kind of research on that at that time, which led for a very interesting childhood, I must say. But I mean, if I'd have had that diagnosis then, then maybe things would be a bit different, and I wouldn't be in this position where I'm advocating for help and understanding and awareness and stuff. But still, at the same time, I find it really interesting that it took them that long to kind of, you know, 1940s research, 1992 and then 1994 actually getting diagnostic criteria into people's lives. That's just crazy. But it's fascinating as well. And obviously there are some controversy surrounding Hans Asperger and the, you know, the creation of his research. I did a video on that too, so I'm sure if you, I'll try and leave a link for that in the description below if I remember. If not, you can just obviously search for Hans Asperger in the Aspie world and you'll find the video I did on that, talking about all his quite controversial history. But the other bloke who was doing research on you know, autism and Asperger type of conditions was a guy called Leo Kanner, and he basically had similar research at the similar time as Hans Asperger was doing his research, and it was funny actually, they published the stuff around about the same time. Kanner was in America, and I believe that Hans Asperger was still in Austria, so I don't think they knew of each other's research at that moment in time, but I find it quite fascinating that the research came about at the exact same time from two people in completely different continents. That kind of stuff just blows my mind. I just love it. Man, it's awesome. But I just love the fact that I can just bring you guys around here and show you my setup. This is the desk that I was filming that video on, and I find that really, really cool. Now, guys, listen up carefully. I'm actually going to VidCon in Anaheim this year, which is VidCon USA. Now, if you are a person who goes to VidCon, then you will be able to come and see me. I'm talking on a neurodiverse panel, talking about autism, ADHD, and all things cool like that. So if you're interested, definitely come along to the panel. And also, I'll be trying to do some kind of meet and greet in the hotel somewhere in Anaheim, which is going to be super awesome. I'm also heading off to Boston, Massachusetts next month, and I'm doing some stuff with MIT on social media influencing and leading, social campaigning and stuff like that. And I'm hanging out with I think it's Chris from Special Books by Special Kids. I think that's what his channel is called. Super influential, super awesome. Anyway, guys, I hope you liked this video. Make sure to give this a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you're not already. Hit that subscribe button. But as always, guys, you can click the videos around me, and I'll see you next time. Peace.